Thanks everyone for joining the webinar this morning. Today you've got myself, Jonathan, and Brett Crawley from Mimecast, sorry, Brett, talking about benchmarking SAT, like static application security testing tools and security tools in general. Both of us have had a fair bit of experience in this space. And yeah, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about like why doing security proofs of concept or proofs of value are hard, how to assess SAST tools and other general security tools, and the do's and don'ts for like these kind of trials. Brett, did you want to introduce yourself? You're on mute. Sorry, mate. Have a go now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I'm a principal application security engineer. I've been doing that for quite a while now. I've written a book on threat modeling, gameplay with elevation of privilege card game, and Adam Showstock wrote the forward for that. And I also have been doing the OWASP application security awareness campaign posters, which you should be able to see behind me. So that's me. And I'll talk about my experience of doing testing of SAST and some of my background that influenced my the methodology that I'll talk about.
Yeah, thanks for that. And as a quick introduction to myself, I'm Jonathan Werrett. I'm head of security at Semgrep. So my role is focused on securing the company and our product rather than building the product. Before that, I was head of security at Fitbit, and spent some time at Google with the Fitbit acquisition. Worked at places like Palantir. My focus has generally been on application security, and that's what I love to work in. Although these days I'm stretched a little bit across many different disciplines. And a fun fact for me, I was the first Semgrep customer way back before the company was even called Semgrep. Yeah, so I've had a lot of experience both deploying SAST tools in particular, as well as a whole bunch of other security tools and things. So, Brett, like, why are POCs so hard?
Okay, well, when we started looking at different SAST tools, we had a problem finding any benchmarks online to sort of give us an idea of the quality of the results that they were giving us. And in the past, I used to write text mining software. And in text mining, you look at the precision and recall, and you so to find out how good the results are, and from that you calculate something called an F score, which is a single value. And I was looking at, I was trying to find something that would give me this, and the market analysts were telling me, oh yeah, they were giving me a detection score between 1 and 5, but they weren't explaining it. And they were talking about the features, and but there was no real substance to what they were saying. And to give you a bit of understanding of what the precision and the recall are, the recall is if you know that you've got 100 flaws in the software, then the recall is how many of those you found. So if you found 90% of those, then that's your recall. The precision is how many of the results that you find are correct. Because if you found 90% of the result, the flaws, but you found sort of 300% of that figure were false positives, then you've got too much noise. And it's balancing those out, and that's where the F score comes in. It's basically saying, okay, are my true positives and my and the number of flaws that I'm finding such that I've got little noise, but I've got good quality results. And what I was finding when talking to vendors was that they were just telling me their false positive rate. It's like, well, okay, but if you haven't found anything, then you're not going to have any false positives. That doesn't tell me anything.
Right, right. And when we first spoke, and you were telling me this experience, like that really like resonated with me. We both at Semgrep, the company, and in my previous roles have spent a whole bunch of time trying to figure out like how do we know that the sort of SAST tooling, the source code analysis tooling that we're deploying is actually giving us, quality results. And I think quality can mean a lot of things. I do love the sort of the scientific sort of basis for the F score, or the holistic kind of way that it approaches it. I think the other thing that we see a lot is, or I find a lot, is that not all findings are born equal.
Exactly.
There's, security teams and developers are going to have to eventually consume these things. So like if you're flooding those teams with low quality or low criticality, or or potentially false positive issues, you're probably doing more damage than good, definitely. Right. And the other thing that really struck me in terms of like when I was back in previous roles testing a whole bunch of these source code analysis tools is there's just no real good industry benchmark that you can go and compare in a sort of non-biased way what each of these tools are doing and what are the results. I think back to sort of 15 years ago when I was in working for a company that sold WAFs. The OWASP had a whole like WAF testing suite and would do bake-offs and things like for new generations of WAFs, and that just doesn't exist for source code analysis.
Well, also, if it did, one of the problems you've got there is that everybody would train just to get the best result on that data set. Right. And that doesn't necessarily find you what you want out in the wild. And it's not just about getting the OWASP top 10. It's about finding vulnerabilities in general. This is somewhat of a problem because there's no independent third party doing this, right. But at the same time, or rather there are, but they're not doing it perhaps as well as they could, probably because they don't do this, they don't use these tools for a living. But at the same time, you can't rely on the vendors to do it because they will train their system to give you the best result on that particular tool. So what we did was we did instead of doing a pure like F score, we did a comparative, but we also put a bit of weighting in that based upon the severity of the issues. So like you said about having different importance of different issues. And the way we did that was we took some projects and we ran multiple tools against these. We then looked at the results. And what we were doing was taking the common set of results and saying, okay, let's exclude these because everybody's found those. And then let's look at the ones that one tool has found that the others haven't. Maybe two tools have found these and the others haven't. And we were using those to build up a list for each tool of what it had missed. Well, I'll correct myself there. First of all, we were verifying that they were valid results. So determining that was giving us the false positive rate, but the false negative rate, which is the number of flaws that have been missed, we were calculating that for each tool comparatively by looking at what the others had found that they hadn't.
Yeah. And when you're doing this, were you doing it on common open source code bases, or were you doing it on your own internal code bases?
We were doing it on our own internal code bases. We'd actually chosen a couple of code bases where we'd had some flaws that we knew about, and they'd been fixed. But we went back in our repo and found older versions where we knew these flaws existed, and then we ran the tools against this. That way, we knew we'd be able to find some results, because it wouldn't be very good if we ran it on code that was perfect. Not that you ever find code that's perfect.
All of the code that I write is perfect, but I'm not sure about everybody else. Yeah, I do love that. I love that approach, because it's realistic. It's replicating what it's actually going to be like to run that tool on your, company's source code going forward into the future. You're talking about like sort of vendors. You can't trust vendors. Representing the vendors a little bit on this side of the fence. I mean, it's an open secret that all of our products make sure that we have good coverage for like those very well-known vulnerable example applications. Like there's the OWASP WebGoat and the damn vulnerable web app kind of code bases. Unfortunately, like, I think there's a little bit of like causation or correlation here. A lot of the POCs that we run into, the AppSec teams are just deploying like this, well-known open source application, running our tool against it and calling that the trial, which is just not replicating what you're going to experience in real life once you've sort of chosen something and deployed it. I think like the other thing that represents a really good POC to me is being very clear on the technical requirements. If you go into like the market analysts, the Gartners or whoever of the world, and look at how they assess security tools, they've just got a very like 1,000-foot high level sort of approach to this. Once again, you mentioned because they're not doing these things day in, day out. But, so the criteria they'll use is like, all the basic stuff is like cost, breadth of language support. The crazy one for me is breadth of application security testing methodology. So they really want to see solutions that do DAST and SAST and IAST and MAST, like all the acronyms, which I feel like is just, sorry, you go, Brett.
I was just going to say DAST is dead, isn't it?
Well, it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. I think like any mature application security program has like a mix of ways of testing the products, whether DAST or SAST or pen testing or whatever else is right for you really depends on sort of your mix of technology and things. But certainly as a SAST vendor, I would say source code based approaches are some of the highest signal, at least. Let's say that. But yeah, the sort of market analyst approach to assessing these tools, it's too high level. It doesn't have any relation to how you will use that application. And I think like structuring a good POC, the first thing is going like, okay, what really matters to us? Okay, we've got like 5 languages, but like really 2 of them are the most important. We want to have customizability. Like we want to make sure that the pen test we run in 6 months' time, we can write rules to capture the new findings that we've missed previously. Those kind of things. We want to have, particularly in the sort of SAST space, it's not just the security team that's the stakeholders, it's the developers. Hopefully, the developers are one of the main users of the tool. And you often see POCs that don't even really consider the developer perspective. They might not have those stakeholders involved in the project. So, yeah.
We actually had developers involved, because they perhaps knew some of the flaws in those applications better than the AppSec team did. So they were an asset in themselves, because they had more context. And again, speaking to the point around context, one of the things that most tools don't take into account is the config of a system. So when you've got people talking about reachability analysis, or when you've got people reachability analysis is one example, because in the days of Spring, you had, and with dependency injection, you've got the possibility to do declarative dependencies. And unless you're taking into consideration the config, then you're not going to actually know that, because it's not in the code where the linkage is. It's actually in a config file. And the same applies for things like log4j and carriage return line feed injection. A lot of tools will tell you that you've got carriage return line feed injection, but if you actually enabled in the format pattern one of the encoders, then you won't have that. But the tool will be telling you have. So there are some flaws in the design that don't allow it to take into consideration the context in which it's being run.
Yeah, I do like those examples, because I think, like, I've got this whole theory that, security tools in general, and SAST is particularly one of them, can only sort of be focused at the lowest common denominator of vulnerabilities, right? Like the vulnerabilities that you expect to be, pretty broad-based, that every organization could run into them, that they're easy to detect. If you don't build your application to like capture those, then you're not even going to be in the sort of shortlist. But unfortunately, as you mature as an AppSec team, and we found this very much so in some of the teams that I was running, you've got yourself out of like those ruts. So you're not suffering from the lowest common denominator of vulnerabilities. You're really suffering from the things that are very specific to your ecosystem. So like you might have mitigating controls, or you might have like a build environment that is very dynamic and is pulling in these dependencies, and that
sanitizers as well.
Right, exactly. So I think one of those criteria that I would argue should be sort of on the list, depending on your organization, is like, is this tool configurable? Can we, as we mature as an organization, mature our security program, can we still get value out of it? Are we going to be able to write custom rules? Is there that flywheel of like finding things, crushing a whole class of vulnerabilities and moving on to the next one? Are we actually going to be able to do that with this tool, or is this tool just going to help us get out of like the first step, the terrible lowest common denominator of vulnerabilities?
Yeah.
So,
and one of the others are, like you said about crushing the where you've got lots of the same issue. I mean, that's another area where if the tool can give you some sort of centrality or some hotspots, you can thereby go and fix it there, and you fixed it in 100 different places. And they're some of the functions that we were looking for in tools. But I mean, some of the other things that we were looking for were around ease of installation, how much you had to configure just to get results in the first place.
Right.
The usability aspect, both for the AppSec team and for the dev team. And for the dev team, they didn't want to be going into different tooling. They want to be able to see it in their pull requests or directly in their editor, or editor IDE. So when we were approaching different vendors, we had a checklist of things that we were looking for before even starting, and some of those were IDE plugins. Some of the things were around the secure by default configuration.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like cost is obviously always going to be on someone's shortlist in terms of like the important things, but I think particularly that ease of implementation, that's something that's often overlooked, right? That really security tools are expensive enough as they are, and this is why POCs are so difficult, because you're like, well, okay, there's a lot of money on the line here. Whatever tool we choose, we're going to spend not, could potentially be spent the next couple of years, or 6 months to 24 months implementing it, and then hopefully getting value out of it. It's I think that's why POCs are difficult, right? Because it's you're looking down the barrel of probably many months worth of effort.
Well, also, if you've already got a tool, you're going to be wanting to migrate over to another tool, and it's the ease of integration into your pipeline as well. That's an important one to consider, because the easier and being able to automate that as well. So the pull request one is quite a good for that, because you just with many tools, you can now point them to your main repo, and they'll do the analysis for you and set things up. But certainly, the less that you have to do to get up and running, the better it is, because that way you can start getting value straight away.
I agree, but I feel like the security industry in particular is like this special snowflake, right? And there's the ease of implementation, which is naturally pulling against like security. A lot of our customers rightly are, concerned about how much information they're sending to their SaaS providers, whether they be a security company or not. Semgrep, internally, we've like really had this debate, and we've got sort of two different deployment models, one of which will, you can deploy our tool in your environment and it never exports source code. It does all the analysis with inside your environment. It does send back findings, because we need those findings to, present, et cetera, and help you manage. But yeah, there's this natural tension, and you want it to be really easy to deploy, but you're like, oh, what data are we going to expose in that process? But I feel like every other industry or every other sort of engineering specialty is like, oh, whatever, the easiest solution to deploy wins, and isn't really considering that sort of data export aspect.
But I mean, when you've got CI/CD, it should be if you integrate the scan component into your CI/CD, it's then it's the ease of doing that that's important, as opposed to the ease of, I mean, the results going to the server should be easy anyway. And when the results get to the server, then you've got the usability aspect. But
yeah, exactly. I just threw up some of the sort of like do's and don'ts that we sort of jammed out. And I think we've touched on a lot of these, right? Like particularly on the do side, it's know what's important to you. Like market analysts are not going to tell you the things that you really care about. I think that's probably the most important step. Like sitting down, talking to stakeholders, mapping out the 5 to 25 things that you really must that are important, and then doing a good job. I mean, the F-score methodology that you presented is great, because it's like scientific and it's like real data. It's quantitative, not qualitative. But I feel like even qualitative, like yes, no, kind of like, does it have this or that features, is better than not having any process there.
Yeah, I mean, we did a mix of the two, because we used one to refine the candidates, or to reduce the set of candidates, and then we used the scientific approach to then say, okay, now that we know which the contenders are, which one of these is, if money's no object, is the one that we want. And that's how we approached it. Then we could reason on, okay, yeah, this one is better, but is it for that 5% increase, is it worth the X increase in cost?
Right. But yeah, I love that approach, that you're using sort of 2 rounds, filtering on the easy things to assess, and then spending time on maybe doing a deep POC, because a deep POC with like 1 or 2 solutions that you can do that sort of more quantitative analysis. because the thing is, like, these POCs, they take a significant amount of time. Like, Semgrep's a small startup. The security tools that we've deployed and run POCs for, it basically swamps the security team for a month plus, just to run these tests. Speak to vendors, do the dance, go through all the bravado of like presentations, get the actual access to the tool, deploy it in a realistic kind of scenario, then run it for a bit and see how it goes. It's just a lot of work. But I also think it's worth it because you potentially living with this tool for many years. It might be a number of months, maybe years before you've even really got it dialed in to the point that you're happy with it. But the realistic trials thing there is, I think, really important. The most disappointing thing I've seen, and I've seen it pretty regularly, is doing POCs of these code analysis security tools, or any security tool really, that are assessing different vendors based purely on the number of findings that have, this tool found 1,000, that tool only found 800 in specific repos. Or specific areas, and therefore the tool that had more findings is better, because not all findings are equal.
Well, again, it was looking at the results. Some vendors were giving things that we would consider a high, a medium severity, and things that we would consider not to be quite so important, a higher severity. It's like that also is important, because you need to look at it from your organization's perspective. And going through the results, it's also important to understand, okay, this tool it's given me 10,000 results, but if 9,999 are low and one is critical, and the others have given me 15 criticals, then it's okay. I'm not that interested in the 9,999 lows.
To me, that says configurability, right? Like, I think particularly with no tool is going to have like the full context of your organization. It's not going to have the context of like the piece of infrastructure that it's looking at, where this code is deployed, et cetera, et cetera. But it's super important to be able to like take the findings, add as much intelligence or context over the top of those findings before sending it on, particularly to other teams like developers, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that we didn't touch on though is, and one of the things that I weigh very highly when choosing a new security tool to deploy is like speaking to actual users of those solutions. Like, you'll always get mixed signals. It was terrible at the beginning, or it's terrible in this part of its application. But that gives you sort of real life, realistic assessments of how the tool, the strengths and weaknesses of any tool. I feel like any good vendor will happily put you in touch with, reference customers or customers that. I guess the other piece is like, there's no point if you're a 200-person startup with containerized infrastructure and modern languages going and talking to Ford or JP Morgan about like their uses of a potential tool, because you're going to have very different environments. I think the important piece there is getting introduced to comparable companies and seeing how it's working for them.
Also, within the team, you've probably got people who've used different tools over a period of time, and you can get them to do like a show and tell to help you understand the different features of each tool. Because everybody will have a different take on it, and
right. Yeah, I think yes, but qualify that with, I've done this myself, often run into like, oh, that tool was terrible for whatever reason, not reassessing sort of those priors. Like, is this environment different? Is this problem different? Are we using different languages? have things changed. So I think like get all that data, but like also be cognizant of like the biases that could be. Another sort of anti-pattern I see is like, oh, I used this tool at the last place. Let's just use that. I think, sure, that might be right, but I think it's a good time to like go look at the market and just like, reassess things. It doesn't have to be a deep reassessment, but blindly using something because it's been used before seems like a wasted opportunity.
It's also our curiosity to go and see what's changed.
Right. Yeah, and like in terms of the don't things, market analysts, they give you a pretty quick precise of various things that they've assessed with different vendors. That's great, but I wouldn't over-index on what's coming out of sort of that sort of whole part of the industry. Definitely artificial tests, damn vulnerable web OWASP WebGoat and things, at least in the SaaS space. It's another data point. It's certainly something that's quick and easy to do, but I wouldn't make that the sole assessment. We spoke about treating all findings equally, and don't rush it. Like I think like choosing a tool in a week is definitely an anti-pattern.
Because you're probably going to have to live with it for quite a few years.
Yeah. We didn't get any questions through the chat, and we're running slightly over, but is there any sort of final things that you want to leave people with in terms of choosing security tools, Brett?
Yeah, I'd also go for I mean, because I've worked as a dev for a number of years as well, and I'd certainly go for a tool that helps with an approach of clean as you go, because that if people are cleaning up whilst they're coding, and it might not even be things that they've put into the code, but they open a file and they see something and they just clean it while they go, then you're going to end up with a better product, a more secure product. Now, when I say that, you need to be careful that you've got good tests in place so you don't break anything, because there may be a reason that it's doing something that way. And the other thing that you need to consider there is when it does a scan of a single file, it doesn't have much context, so it will only find the simple things. So you need a scan that goes into a bit more depth to get everything.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things onto that. Like I would say configurability and being able to, like, your example of the line feed in headers vulnerability and being able to like go like, no, we've got a sync that is cleaning that up. Please don't like raise any of those findings. I think that's super important, but just generally configurability will help, get extended lifetime out of any solution. And the other thing is like maybe guardrails, right? Like it's all very well to like detect bad things and then raise them with the right teams. I mean, even that is not always easy to set a very simple process. I think it's much better to spend a lot of time just going like this one thing that we're worried about, let's make sure that it can never happen. Or if it, it's very difficult to like break out of the secure flow. We do have one question from Honor. If we're using mostly, for example, Copilot or something else, do you think we still need a SAST tool? Yes, because Copilot is great. It's a great speed up, but it's been trained on the world, like a big slice of the world's code, which also contains security issues. I mean, there's not just security issues, but biases. I saw some terrible Twitter photos the other day, screenshots the other day of, I don't know if it was Copilot or not, but functions for calculating a woman's salary, which would be 0.85 times the normal salary. There's a lot of biases included in some of these training sets. So yes, be security and many other things. Be careful of the code that Copilot and others are pushing out.
Yeah, well, what was I can't remember which company it was, but when they when they first released an LLM system, and it was a chatbot, they had to take it down after about 24 hours because it became racist, misogynist, and everything else.
Right, that was Microsoft, and I can't remember the name of the chatbot, but yeah. So yes, I think actually Copilot, some of these LLM-based code automation or code speed ups like Copilot pair really well with security tools and other types of tools that are assessing the code. Move fast, but don't break things. We've got another question from Mikhail. Do you evaluate tools periodically once you've adopted them? They're still performing as well as they were during the tests, and what does that process look like? I would say yes, although it's very much driven by the bandwidth. Often the way that I think about my security program is we've got a maturity ladder that we're trying to walk up, and there's parts of the program that are working well and parts of the program that are not working well. I feel like if a part of my security program, say like the static source code analysis or maybe the IAM or the cloud monitoring is working well, but I've got other fires, then I'm very unlikely to start reconsidering the tools that we've deployed in that area. But that said, like if you're slowly walking up that ladder and you deployed a security tool, SAST or any other tool 12 months ago, 18 months ago, and you feel like it's time to circle back to that part of your program, by all means, I think looking at other tools and how they might improve things is definitely something we do. I don't know, what's your thoughts, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, working in AppSec, security teams in general are often seen as a blocker. And so you get a lot of voluntary feedback on the tools that you're using. So that could be used as a good indicator of when you should review your tooling, or how often you should be reviewing your tooling. Because at the end of the day, if your engineering team absolutely load the tool, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. And along those lines, like the business is also always changing, right? Like there's the sort of very engineering things that might change what's the right tool for you. So the classic example is moving from periodic releases, like maybe releasing to production once a week, or slower than that, to continuous releases. That's really going to change like the application security tools that you want to deploy, right? Like if your tool takes 3 hours to run and it's very hard to get those findings back into the developer workflow, I mean, that's not going to be the right tool for continuous releases.
Yeah. And also the same applies from how can I put this? The end user, the engineer, their feeling for the tool will also be influenced by the amount of assistance they get and suggestions on how to fix things. Because if they're finding that, well, it's told me that I've got to do this, but I don't know what I'm actually supposed to do, then that's going to influence the uptake or the I'm not sure how to put it.
Right. Yeah, if you're not, yeah. Ultimately, particularly in this application security space, the software engineers are the ones that have to do the work, or if you can deploy all the tools that you like, but if none of the output of that tool is hitting your source code, then I think the other thing that is useful doing a check-in is this tool, like we haven't heard a lot from this kind of area. Is it still doing the things that we think it's doing? Is it still, and maybe it's not finding anything, but that doesn't mean there's no security issues. It might mean that it's misconfigured or some other underlying assumption has changed. So that's definitely worth keeping a finger on.
Something you can do as well is if you pick what you consider your 10 riskiest applications and you get the tool to do a scan of each of them, just like as a spot check, and then you go through the results and start doing a manual review to see which of what those findings have brought up, but also unpicking it and finding what what other things are provoked by those findings, then that can be a good way of measuring the quality of the results of the tool as well.
Yeah, and going all the way back to your F-score methodology, I feel like if you're doing regular pen tests, then you know, white box over, you know, source code based assessments of your code base, then, you know, that's another great time to go like, okay, like the tool is running, it's capturing some things, but then we got a human in who found all these other things, and, you know, 80% of those could be found through source code analysis. So,
Yeah.
you know, the false negatives. You know, that's a good time to like go back to this kind of very quantitative sort of methodology.
Yeah.
I think we're at the top of the webinar now. So Brett, thank you for your time. It's been great. Check out your book. What's it called again?
It's Threat Modeling Gameplay with EOP, Elevation of Privilege. The card game for threat modeling from Adam Shostak.
Ah, cool. Yeah.
It's basically it walks you through how to play the game, but it also gives you examples for all of the cards, so that because the cards contain different threats, and sometimes those you don't know how those might manifest themselves in your design. So it gives you an example so that you can perhaps picture it better and help you find your issues.
Yeah, forget about SAST. Use threat modeling to not have the issues in the first place, I think.
Well,
a bit of both. A bit of both.
If you can reduce the pipe of issues coming in, then you've got less to clean up at the end as well.
Yeah, everyone would be happier. Okay, that's great. Well, thanks everyone for attending this morning.